So this week I was on TalkSport on the show with Simon Jordan and Spencer Oliver, as I do every week, and our guest was Chris Eubank Sr. I got the chance to speak to him about what's going to happen in this fight. I got the chance to talk to him off the camera when the cameras weren't rolling. I've sparred Chris Eubank Jr. My brother Liam has fought Chris Eubank Jr. twice. I've been around Conor Benn and Nigel Benn for most of my career as a professional, and my prediction on this fight will be coming up later on and what I think will happen in this fight. And it might surprise you because it's different from my last prediction for the last fight, which I was right on. So the first fight in April was a very entertaining fight. I was sat ringside, my brother Liam was on the show, as I said, so that's why I was there, but I was also around all week. And the fight culminated in the performance that I felt it deserved, and both fighters left it all in the ring. Obviously it's been well documented, the aftercare for the fighters and how affected they both were. They both went to hospital on the night. They both needed to spend the time in hospital, or the night or two in hospital after, to recover. And that happens in grueling fight, and it was a grueling fight. The fact that it was a grueling fight is going to affect my prediction for this fight, and the fact that it was a grueling fight is probably why I was surprised it was such a good fight, because I felt before the fight that it would be one-sided in Chris Eubank's favour, being the bigger, stronger, more experienced fighter who's been in there with better fighters and bigger men, more importantly. This fight, I think, is different, but the first fight, they both deserve our praise and credit from fans and pundits and media and boxing people in general. I do think it was a very entertaining fight. It was a good advert for boxing, especially in this country, in Britain, because we can't fill stadiums like that with fighters who are fighting mainly on the back of the fathers' names, but after what they did on the night, this one should sell and will sell because of what they did alone, not just down to the fathers. But the fathers are there, and that is the most important thing to remember here, because we are suckers for nostalgia. Nostalgia does sell, and it's certainly sold for me. And I will be watching Saturday night, and I'll be looking forward to it. And hopefully it's a better fight than the first fight, which will take some doing. But I think both fighters have it in the locker to make it that type of fight. I think, obviously, Conor Benn needs to put that wrong right, and Chris Eubank needs to just put the final nail in the coffin here and firmly close the chapter on the Benn Eubank rivalry. So I actually sparred with Chris Eubank a few times in 2014. It was a long time ago. It was when I was still fighting. I was just preparing for the world title fight in Germany with Andrade. And Chris Eubank came to the gym, and I was happy that he came to the gym because he had a really good jab, and so did Abraham. So I wanted to obviously counteract that jab by sparring with someone who had a good jab. And at the time, he was travelling around gyms and he was getting some work in. He sparred with myself and my brother Liam. Now the sparring with Liam was obviously heavily documented in their build up to their fights that they had. And I was obviously with Liam and in the same camp and in the corner for those fights. So I've got pretty much a lot of experience with Chris Eubank Jr. I haven't shared the ring with him, and I haven't been in the corner against him when he was fighting my brother twice. So my experience of what Chris Eubank has is there, and my opinion obviously on the fight will carry a little bit of weight because of that. I've never shared the ring with Conor Benn. I was fighting when he very first turned professional, and obviously admire and respect his father massively. I got to meet Conor. He was always nice and polite every time I've met him in the past, and I watched him come through. I've commentated on a couple of his fights, and he can fight, and he can punch, and he's explosive. And he's got to bring all that on fight night should he want to have any success against Chris Eubank Jr, especially after the last fight. But with Chris Eubank Jr, what I noticed when I was sparring was how good he was inside. He was really good at putting his head on your chest and nullifying your work and making you fight his fight. On the back foot boxing, he wasn't the best of boxers, and I think that's been proven in the past when people have stood off him and jabbed him and actually outboxed him. He can be outboxed. I think we saw that in the George Groves fight. I think we saw a little bit of that in the Billy Joe Saunders fight also. But they were tough fights, and that they are miles on the clock as well. And as I mentioned in the past, the types of names that I mentioned, like your George Groves or Korobov or Abraham, or big punching, big super middleweights, like I mentioned, they didn't seem to bother Chris. And when I was sparring with him, I noticed he was durable and how tough he was. That goes with age though, and as I've said time and time again, we might see the age come in play in this fight. I think it will come into play in this fight, but we haven't got a crystal ball, so we'll have to wait and see until tomorrow night. But as I said, sparring with Chris was an enjoyable experience. It was tough. He was a good fighter, to be fair, and he gained my respect in there, and I think I gained his. It was really a bit of an experience sharing the ring with him, having his father on the ropes as well, calling advice out and that. But having his dad in the gym at the time was a good thing also, because we got a little few pointers off him here and there. And listen, it's Chris Eubank Sr, so you have to respect him for what he did in the game and what he continues to do in the game. So my tactics, if I'm Conor Benn, what do I have to do this time? I think he has to get inside a lot more. I think he's got to do a lot more of what he did in the last fight. I don't think he has to change much, even though he lost the fight. I think he should take a lot of confidence from his last performance. I think he should take confidence from the fact that he knows he can hurt Chris Eubank Jr. also, who always has been a very tough, durable, big middleweight. The fact that Conor Benn, who is a welterweight, make no mistake about it, he's a welterweight. The fact that he was hurting him a little bit and getting a bit of a reaction from him and stiffening the legs a little bit, that says it all for me in this fight. So for me, the confidence should be lying with Conor Benn. You've proven that you can hurt him even though you're a welterweight. You've proven that even though you shouldn't probably be in there, you can have a bit of success. And I think if he plays on that and he works even harder to stay inside, to get in the pocket, to let them unorthodox overhand swings while he throws or go, I think one of them will land. I think a couple of them will land. He will have success in this fight, and I think when he has the success, he's got to really go for it and try and jump on Chris Eubank Jr. It's not ruled out that he can't get the stoppage. I think he can get the stoppage, and I think if he really, really works hard at it, he keeps tight himself, he doesn't get caught on the way in himself, and he really makes it uncomfortable for Chris Eubank Jr., then that's his best chance of success. He has to make Chris Eubank work from the first bell to the last bell of every round, and I think if he does that, then later on in the fight it's going to get very interesting. For Chris Eubank Jr., the tactics in this fight, I think, are to maybe box a little bit more in this fight. Work on the jab a bit more, conserve your energy a little bit more, and don't waste as much as you did in the last fight. He wasted a lot of shots in the last fight. He set a really good pace. And the only thing with a good pace when you set it is, it's difficult to take your foot off the gas. And the minute you do take your foot off the gas, you're allowing him to come back in than the opponent. And I think Conor Benn will be a lot more confident in this fight. I think Chris knows he can win, but I think he should have known he could win all along in that fight. Chris has a lot more experience than Conor Benn. Chris has been in with the better fighters than Conor Benn. He's won better titles than Conor Benn. He's probably earned a lot more money than Conor Benn in his career. All the chips were on Chris Eubank's side of the table in the last fight, and he had it all to lose and not much to really gain apart from sort of putting the family legacy another one in their notch in their column. I think this time there's a lot more to lose because he knows he can be hurt also. I think there's a lot more to lose in the fact that he knows he's at the very end of his career and there's not many of these nights left for Chris Eubank Jr. I wouldn't be surprised when lose or draw if Chris Eubank Jr. was to retire on Saturday night. I think tactically he has to get it right though. I think he's got to box a little bit more. I think he's got to use his jab a little bit more, and he's got to try and dominate and control the fight and make it a little bit easier for himself than it was last time, because it was a grueling fight last time for him. It was 12 grueling rounds, and this time, if he has to go back to the well again, who knows if it's actually still there. I think it is still there. I think he will be in great shape as he always is. He's a consummate professional. He does work hard. He's obviously made the weight well today as well, which I didn't think was going to be an issue anyway. As I've said in previous videos, I think all of that weight making issues and the fact that he's publicising it so much is just to garner maybe a little bit of sympathy, but we all work hard to make weight. He's worked really hard to make his weight, but I think he's made it relatively well. I think the rehydration clause shouldn't be an issue, and on fight night he should have 12 good rounds in him, but tactically I think he's got to box a little bit more. I think he's got to keep it smart and not let Conor Benn in too much. He's got to keep tight. That's the most important thing for Chris Eubank Jr. He's got to keep tight because Conor Benn likes to swing them unorthodox shots with a lot of explosiveness in. So I don't think we can finish this without speaking about the parents, and the reason why we're here is the parents. And I grew up absolutely idolising Nigel Benn. I loved to hate Chris Eubank when I was younger, senior. I've grown to love him a bit later on in his career when he fought the likes of Calzaghe and Carl Thompson, and when he really sort of put his heart on his sleeve and showed us that the persona that he was playing was a persona. And he still plays it to this day. I think deep down inside somewhere there's the real person, and not many will probably be privileged enough to see that real person, but I spent Tuesday with him all morning and early afternoon on TalkSport, and getting to see him behind closed doors when he relaxed a little bit and let the guard down a little bit. He was a decent fella to be around, and listening to some of the tales that he had and some of the stories and some of the anecdotes and the analogies that he used. He's an intelligent man and he knows what he's doing, and he's very, very clever, but I hated him growing up as a fighter, and because he beat Nigel Benn, and I loved Nigel Benn. And for this fight, I think the roles have reversed a little bit, especially for me, and I'm finding myself siding with Chris and wanting to see Chris Jr. do well because of how he's speaking, how he's coming across, how he's carrying himself and how he's been. And he's one of them fighters probably a bit like his dad, where you love to hate him at the start and now you're starting to sort of endear to him and warm to him. But this fight wouldn't be spoken about, as I said, without mentioning those two. Watching Nigel Benn when I was a kid against Gerald McLennan was one of the memories that will really stick in my mind and will probably live with me for the rest of my life. I've never seen a fight like that. I'm probably since I've struggled to see fights like that, and I've seen some great fights live. I've seen some brilliant fights on TV. But watching that as a kid, I remember the feeling of having the sweat between my arms from holding my arms together as much as I could on a one-seated chair, leaning over the sides in my old house, in my mum and dad's old house in Kirkdale. And I've never really experienced much like it since. The feelings that I had watching that fight when you think Ben was out of it in the first round and then come back and to battle the way he did. Obviously it ended in tragic circumstances, but for that fight, for me, Nigel Benn will always sort of hold a soft spot in my heart for it, for how he performed and how he dug in on that fight. And that fight was a case of proving that you'll never give in, and you'll get there, and you can't get there. And if you're going to give in, you need to really dig in, and he dug in that night. Chris Eubank, watching him as a kid growing up, I used to, as I say, you watch him, you want him to lose, and you want him to get beaten, you want him to be put in his place, so to speak, because he was arrogant and cocky. But I've never seen an entrance like it since, and listening to Simply the Best come on when he was coming to the ring, and watching the replays now, and watching the old videos on YouTube, and seeing how he performed and how he won that crowd over. As I said, 50% of the people were probably there to see him lose and get beat, but the other 50% loved him. And like him, love him, or loathe him, them entrances were unbelievable and will take some beating. And listening to Tina Turner, Simply the Best, was never the same after he fought. And every time I hear it now, the hairs on my neck stand up. And when I saw him get out that car in Tottenham Hotspur's ground, I was sitting next to my wife watching the fight after my brother Liam had lost. And my son was sitting with me and my daughters were around me, and I said, I hope he plays Simply the Best now he's here. I am a sucker for nostalgia. I was suckered in by the nostalgia. And on this fight, I think the nostalgia is still there, and it has to be there because we're here because ultimately of the fathers. But this time we're going to see the sons fight again. We're going to see them settle the whole family story, as we say. And I think this one might just set up a third fight should Conor Benn have a bit of success, but we'll see later on in my prediction whether that's going to come through or not. So Conor Benn's power, he is explosive. He's like his father. His father was very explosive when he used to fight. And he's one of the most exciting fighters I've ever seen, Nigel Benn. He always will be a hero of mine growing up, and he always will be a legend in British boxing. But Conor's power is a bit different, and I don't think it's as devastating as what his father had. And I think the proof's in the pudding. I think his last, obviously, 3 fights since he moved up and since he failed the drug test, there hasn't been any knockouts. There's been 1 loss on points, and there's been 2 wins on points. The last big knockout that we had, I've got it in front of me here, was Chris Van Heerden, and in the second round, and before that, a devastating one against Chris Algier, and he really looked explosive that night. But those obviously were down at welterweight, down at 147, and this is a big jump up to middleweight. The power obviously is going to be needed should he want to put a dent in Chris Eubank, but whatever power he has now, he had in his last fight, and it did make a little bit of a dent in Chris Eubank, and that's what I'm saying. It may not be the most explosive and bigger punches at middleweight, but it probably will be enough should he land clean on a chin against Chris Eubank, in my opinion. So this brings me to my prediction, and my prediction for the fight is different to my prediction from the last fight. And the last fight, I feel, and I still do, and I always have felt, that a good big un beats a good little un. And I think a welterweight in Conor Benn should not be beaten, should not be troubling, should not be bothering, and should not be hurting a big middleweight in Chris Eubank Jr. But he did. And he didn't have him gone, he didn't have him beat, he didn't have him out of there, but he hurt him and he got a reaction from him. And this is a fighter in Chris Eubank who didn't get budged or hurt or bothered by people like George Groves and big super middleweights out there. And I feel that the fact that Conor Benn was making a dent in him and was getting a reaction out of him, I think that's what's going to sway me prediction in this one and sway my opinion on this one. And my opinion is now that I feel Conor Benn can hurt Chris Eubank, and I think he will have learned a lot from the last fight. I think that the experience that Chris Eubank has will come into play, but also I think the hard fights that Chris Eubank's had in the past as well, and the hard long training camps that Chris Eubank's had in the past will come into play. Because I don't care if you live the life and you never get out of shape and you're always staying in the gym. Staying in the gym, living the life and always being in shape has its effects on your body also. It takes its toll on your body. And your body starts to fall apart and deteriorate, and injuries creep in, and we all know what happens with age, and then it catches up to you, and eventually it's just not there no more, and your body won't do what you want it to do. I think that will come into play with Chris Eubank. I think he's had a lot of hard nights and a lot of hard camps. I think he works really hard. I've seen him in the gym because I've sparred him, as I've said on this video already, and I know how hard he works, and he does give it 100%. So my prediction for the fight is I think Conor Benn's going to start finding a home for some of them overhand right hands and the wild shots that he swings. I think he will get a reaction out to Chris Eubank, and I'm siding with Conor Benn for this fight. I think the safe money is on a Chris Eubank points win, but my prediction for the fight is I think Conor Benn will win the fight, possibly by a late stoppage, if not just enough on points. So that's the prediction. Let me know what you think in the comments, whether you think the fight's going to go differently, and we'll debate it in there. Next week, I'm going to give you a prediction on what I feel will happen in the David Benavidez and Andrade fight from Riyadh on the 22nd of September. So we'll preview that one as well as recapping this one. And we'll have a good chat about what happens in this fight tomorrow night. I think it's going to be a very exciting fight, as I've said. And I think next week in Riyadh will be an equally good show, with obviously David Benavidez and Andrade in a great fight in the light heavyweight division. My brother Callum holds an interim title in that fight, and his fight is due to be finalised soon with a bit of luck. It's looking like David Morrell, and we'll see what happens with that one. But tune in next week and we'll have a chat about Benavidez and Riyadh, and we'll recap on what happens in this fight tomorrow night between two good fighters, obviously the sons of legends in this country.